Hello. I'm just checking the audio is coming through. Hello, Ben Walker in Erith. Hello. In Erith, Kent. Brendan watching from Philadelphia. Richard Clements in Essex. And John from London town. And about 26 others of you. Helen Wells from Norwich. Mark Ariwala. Nice to see you. Or see you there. I'm not going to give a long introduction today because we've got several things coming up. Jonathan Watts, who has organised tonight's event, which is an Oven By event, a series of talks, screenings and discussions. He'll be giving a short introduction for about 15 minutes before we listen to On Vanishing Land, a piece by Justin Barton and Mark Fisher, you've tuned in for tonight. So without too much further ado, I'll be back at the end for a little bit more chat. Hello Rosie, signed in from Harleston, and Nikki. Yeah, I'll pass over hopefully now to Johnny in a very smooth. Johnny, do you want to start your video? Yeah. Yeah, you can. You're on, Johnny.
Very good. Hello. Welcome on this rather dreary Thursday evening in lockdown. Are we in lockdown? Who knows? But we're all being vigilant, I'm sure of that. My name's Jonathan. I'm an art writer and an occasional curator based in Norwich. I'm also the programmer of On the By, which is an ongoing series of artist talks, screenings and conversations hosted by the Assembly House Trust in Norwich. On the By is part of a wider programme of contemporary art and activity, which is overseen by the Trust's visual arts coordinator, Henry Jackson, you just now. The programme On the By doesn't really have a thematic design as such. In other words, it's not tightly programmed to develop a set of themes. But actually, what coheres the programme, however loosely, is that the work that's presented has some association with East Anglia. So several weeks ago, we welcomed the Norwich-born artist-filmmaker Louis Henderson, who screened for the first time in the UK, in as much as territorial bandedness means anything on YouTube, a film called Evidence of Things Unseen But Heard from 2018. And commissioned by Natasha Ginwala and IFA Gallery in Berlin for the exhibition Riot, Slow Cancellation of the Future. Henderson's film is the first chapter in a series of audio-visual collages conducted as what Henderson calls an archaeological survey into the music scene of the city of Bristol, specifically with reference to the Bristol sound. And those of you who saw the screening will remember the contentious statue of Edward Colston figured at the start of Louis' film, which remarkably, in the eruption of Black Lives Matter protests following the murder of George Floyd, was toppled and sunk in the harbour. So quite a remarkable coda. In previous events online, we screened the work of the filmmaker Emily Richardson, and prior to that, Simeon Barclay gave a presentation on Black masculinity, which was developed while Simeon was an artist in residence at Girton College in Cambridge. This evening, absolutely thrilled to welcome Justin Barton, who will present the audio essay on Vanishing Land, which was produced in collaboration with the late Mark Fisher in 2006. Justin will join me for a conversation and take questions from you, the audience, afterwards. On Vanishing Land, abbreviated to OVL, was first presented as a sound installation in 2013 at the showroom in London with Justin and Mark as members of the Otolith group. Subsequently, in 2019, it was released by Hyperdub Records, who started their Flatline sub-label specifically to do so, to publish the work. And it was this event that I hoped would begin of and by last year. Little did I know, of course, that it would be taking place not as a group listening in front of a PA system in physical space, but streamed via the interface of a computer or device into domestic settings. And on that note, if you're listening at home and you have a Bluetooth speaker or you've got a spare line into a hi-fi, then now is the time to plug it in. I think the listening experience, the close listening experience, would benefit from this. Collapsing the audio essay into the walking journey as a narrative form, OVL follows the Suffolk coast and inland north from Felixstowe to Woodbridge, taking in the derelict docks, Bordsey Manor, the Air Ministry's secret radar research establishment, the Sandlings Trail, and reaching a kind of crescendo at Sutton Hoo, just outside Woodbridge. The protagonists, named as the nominative plural they, and as they, sometimes they identify and become indiscernible from plant life, for instance. The protagonists are named as they, although the primary narrative voice is Justin's. And they move intently through this literal landscape, which is accompanied by an extraordinary sonic assemblage of original compositions and samples and cut-ups, oral testimonies, field recordings, and literary ghosts. There may be two named authors or producers, but there are other collaborators. So compositions by, among others, Gazelle Twin, John Foxx, and Raime. The editor, Dan Fox, recalls his time as writer-in-residence on a container ship that he, rather interestingly, refers to as an industrial monastic space in the piece. Mary Wayne remembers her mother's secret profession at Bordsey when gender relations in this state of exception that was World War II were upended. Angus Wainwright, National Trust chief architect, archaeologist for the East of England, describes the kind of skillfully crafted worldly treasures of the Sutton Hoo hoard. And M.R. James's ghost stories and Brian Eno's On Land, which are direct responses to this region, become objects to explore dream states, anxiety, delirious detachment, and haunting eeriness. Like, say, W.G. Sebald's The Rings of Saturn, a narrative which really has become synonymous with this coastal region, spawning a tourist industry, however small, in which an event in the landscape can trigger a kind of reverie. Everything signifies, except unlike Sebald, Barton and Fisher are, it seems to me, far more attuned to the affective resonances, the specificities of place, the inhuman, the sense of an alien outside. There's an awareness, feeling, intent, as they put it in OVL, which you'll hear. Mark Fisher was notably a critic of the cult of Sebald. And in his essay, Postmodern Antiquities, Patience After Sebald, about Grant G's film on Sebald, Fisher noted how Sebald morosely trudged through the Suffolk spaces without really looking at them. Sebald offered a middle-brow miserableism, a stock disdain in which the human settlements are routinely dismissed as shabby and the inhuman spaces are oppressive. The landscape in the Rings of Saturn functions as a thin conceit, the places operating as triggers for a literary ramble, which reads less like a travelogue than a librarian's listless daydream. This middle-brow miserableism, as Fisher called it, was an anachronistic, antiquated model of so-called good literature. So there's a sense in which Sebald is fundamentally out of joint with the present. Fisher would go on to write in his book, The Weird and the Eerie, published in 2016, that, and I quote, "The eerie became the major subject of On Vanishing Land. Appropriately, the eerie crept up on Justin and me. It had not been our original focus, but by the end of the project, we found that much of the music, film, and fiction that always haunted us possessed the quality of the eerie. In Justin's book, Hidden Valleys Haunted by the Future, a kind of hybrid work of auto theory, which begins with a year-long period of living in hotels in North Yorkshire in 1978. He recognises what he calls a sunlit, eerie aspect. And the eerie is here, he writes, to be understood primarily as an awareness, however fugitive it might be, of unknown forces that could be either positive or negative and that are both out of sight around you and could perhaps in some sense be stalking you or moving closer to you. But the sunlit eerie is something different and is to do with the feeling that the transcendentally unknown is there in front of you and that this direction is the beginning of the real adventure. For Barton then, the great ghostwriters seem to be a way into what he has referred to as unfettered modernism, which I take to be an alternative to the disenchantment of rationalizing modernism. The idea of the uncanny is somehow indelibly human. It's concerned with interiority, a reconciliation of the shattered subject. Fisher writes in The Weird and the Eerie that the eerie is fundamentally to do with the outside. And here we can understand the outside in a straightforwardly empirical, as well as a more abstract transcendental sense. A sense of the eerie seldom clings to the enclosed and inhabited domestic spaces. We find the eerie more readily in landscapes partially emptied of the human. What happened to produce these ruins, this disappearance? What kind of entity was involved? What kind of thing emitted such an eerie cry? So the eerie, Fisher goes on to write, is fundamentally tied up with questions of agency. And he says, what kind of agent is acting here? Is there agency at all? And these are questions that, for Fisher and Barton likewise, can be asked of the forces governing capitalist society. So capital is at every level considered an eerie entity. It's conjured out of nothing, and capital nevertheless exerts more influence than any alleged substantial entity. Contrary to the sleepy pastoralism of second home Suffolk, compressed in this coastal region, a setting for ghost stories and sacrificial hordes, is the infrastructure, the unknown forces of global capital and military destruction. The eerie then seems to me becomes an ethic and a political aesthetic even, a guiding principle for which the essay, in its form searching, pursuing, is best served in the form of collage. And as Justin has asked in a recent essay titled Sunlit, Overgrown, Derelict, which links his book Hidden Valleys and a novel in process titled The Corridor, in what way is the sonorous sound, music, a thread that leads out of the labyrinth of ordinary reality? So the stream that you're about to hear will last 45 minutes. If you have the means to plug it into a speaker, then I would encourage you to do so. Followed by the streaming of the piece, Justin will join me in conversation for around 45 minutes. We'll talk for around half an hour, and then we will take questions from you, the viewers. The stream has a chat to the right-hand side of the window. And if you're logged in, you can pose your questions there. I'll monitor it when we get to the conversation. Finally, I would say that if you enjoy the sound piece, it can be purchased from Hyperdub. And I would encourage you all to support independent record labels. So thank you very much. And thank you, Justin, for taking the time to join us this evening to present this work. And also thank you to the Assembly House Trust for hosting this event, and thank you to you at home. We'll see you in around 45 minutes.
Hi there, everyone.
Wonderful, thank you.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hi, Justin.
Hi, brilliant.
listening to the the piece on vinyl as I've been doing for a few weeks now, on the in the first half when it says send a few clicks into the unknown, the record player clicks as it it reaches the end. And the same, so the radar becomes this kind of device for sending clicks into the unknown, which unfortunately we miss when we stream like this.
It's extraordinary the way that worked out for the vinyl. Serendipitous or whatever you want to call it.
And listening with headphones as well, which I've not done before. You know, the way that the sound is mixed is eerie. You know, there's sound in that space where it could be in the room somewhere with me. So it's a sort of different experience of listening for me, which I've really enjoyed. It's a really dense work. It's a complex work, and I've been sort of sitting here wondering where to start. It's interesting to me that Mark wrote that the eerie crept up on you both, and you've also written that in the beginning you were drawn to Felixstowe for the World War II ruins. I wonder how that changed in the process of walking or in the process of producing the work.
Well, we were definitely aware with the Second World War ruins that they had an affect which was different from kind of medieval ruins, ruined Gothic structures. It seemed very different. It seemed much more sunlit, and kind of the quality of being taken over by the planet, by vegetation, just produced a kind of positivity. So we were aware already of a kind of difference between the Gothic and something else that we were looking for. And when we went to Felixstowe, we were researching another project, in fact, but we did this walk at the time described in April of 2006, and in the process, I mean, the idea of the eerie, it grew in a way out of the Gothic through M.R. James, in the sense that we realized after a while that we had a zone which we could use as the basis, a kind of we had a terrain, a kind of plane of consistency on which we could construct something, and that it was this space from Felixstowe docks to Sutton Hoo. And we realized that we were looking for the affects of the place, that we were fascinated by the whole terrain, but we also very rapidly realized that we had M.R. James and Brian Eno with us. But having M.R. James produced an urgency about this other affect, this other direction. This whole, this whole other direction as opposed to the direction of the Gothic. Mm-hmm. So we, in starting from there, it was really fundamental, I think, that something else that was not the Gothic, that we were very much in contact with already, became central. And it meant that it was, in a way, it was almost inevitable that we would end up with going in the direction of Picnic at Hanging Rock. Because the thing about Picnic at Hanging Rock was, at that stage, we were kind of referring to it as a kind of solar Gothic. We were finding our way. We knew it wasn't Gothic in any ordinary sense in any way. And it was around about that time that we just began to realize that the best way of thinking about it was that it was eerie rather than Gothic. And it was very much that there was a terrain that was somehow involving kind of an incursion of some other level of reality into it. But it was also that it was eerie in an incredibly powerful sense, in that it suggested some threshold that can be crossed, very unknown, somewhat unsettling, no real knowledge of it, but an upward threshold was suggested. So it couldn't have been more posited by its kind of suggestiveness. So that was kind of key. And in the process, obviously, we started to think about all of these different aspects of the eerie. So that was a way in which the idea of the eerie grew as an element of it.
And you just mentioned Picnic at Hanging Rock, and you mentioned Eno, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess what I'm interested in is this kind of balance between material that you already had in mind, that you were aware was located in that specific kind of terrain, as you call it, and then, you know, how much you then searched for material that you discovered along the way. So this kind of balance between what you already were aware of and working with, and then what presented itself. Could you say something about that relationship between the material?
Yeah, I mean, it was very much a question of staying imminent to the space as much as was possible. It began because we started very, very tight with the space at a level that didn't really involve the dreamings, the fictions, the music produced by people from the area or produced while people were in the area. We began very, very tightly kind of connected to the way in which the area was connected to the world around it. And there were two things that were compelling to start with, which was that the area was twice over about a fending off of the outside. It was a fending off of the outside in terms of the ocean being a threat, so that the whole area is about making sure that nothing like Dunwich happens again. And it was also a massive relics from processes of defense against the outside in terms of other the military kind of forces of other countries, the Martello Towers, the Second World War ruins. And then that was the beginning, but then the third outside was a really fundamental one, which was the outside, which is also everywhere in the form of capitalism. Felixstowe is connected to the world through having an endless stream of container ships coming into it. So that was the starting point. And therefore we'd found a way of making it about the local, but also about the global, about the whole planet. We've got the eerie, or indeed I would in fact say Gothic phenomenon that is capitalism, to give a good example of what I really mean by the Gothic. Because I think the Gothic is totally real in the same way as the eerie is totally real. I don't see them as aesthetic categories at all. We've got the global Gothic there. So it was clear we had a good space that we were working with. And then, in a sense, in a way, because we were following the lines of the outside exteriority, it was a question of including everything at all levels. So it was what we were kind of looking for was some way of thinking about how you could reach the outside of an ordinary perception of the planet, a fundamentally other perception of the planet, which sees it as something far more enigmatic and on the same level, in fact, as human beings, in some way, in some spinacistic or Deleuzian body without organs sense. We were looking for a way of presenting that idea, a genuine moment of seeing the outside of ordinary reality and in relation to the planet. Also, in a sense, there were kind of questions about the outside of our ordinary faculties. It's really important that it focuses so much on fictions, and in invoking kind of lucidity at the end, there's clearly a kind of touching in at the outside of a world dominated by reason. It's like what really is important in this is dreams and lucidity. But to answer your question, I guess what happened was that working with, exceptional things like on land, we worked towards getting to the point where the fundamental idea of the outside, the alterity, the exteriority in every sense, could become part of the work. So we stayed very tight to beginning, very tight at the beginning, and then slowly we included. It was like kind of watching the lines grow slowly outward. We thought about it, we talked it through. We already had the line of kind of the global in the form of capitalism, but it was very important to get to Picnic at Hanging Rock, and we obviously include it thematically by a link through the go-between. We make that link, which is a valid link. It's a very interesting sort of set of connections there.
The coincidence of dates.
Yeah, coincidence of dates. Yes, they're also very solar. They're solar trance films. There's the coincidence of dates. It's fair to include both of them as unfettered modernism, I would say. It's only very elusive, the unfettered modernism of the go-between, but Pinter in the film does an exceptionally good job.
Well, can you just this term unfettered modernism, which obviously is used in the piece and which I talked about in the introduction, could you tell us a bit more about this? What you mean by this unfettered modernism? Because it seems also that there is a sort of sense of, that there might be divergent literary modernisms, and one of them is, the other might be unfettered modernism, as you call it. But perhaps you could tell us a bit more about that.
I mean, I guess the context for this is that for Mark, the very idea of postmodernism was always the idea of a fundamental disastrous collapse. So his term was always POMO, and he had an extraordinary ability to home in and find whatever was POMO about things. And I always found that an exceptionally valuable thing. It was extremely kind of valuable, his way of kind of focusing on the horror of the POMO works. But unfettered modernism, therefore, is the answer to, well, where on earth are you going with modernism? And it's obviously going to be an endless world of different things, but it's being opposed to two different things, I suppose. One would be the world of very experimental, but in the end, somewhat depthless, incredibly sophisticated modernism. I mean, all respect to James Joyce and Ulysses, but nonetheless, unfettered modernism is actually being opposed to certain works within that line of modernism, but simultaneously to kind of modernism's sort of less respectable twin in the form of M.R. James. I mean, by this time, there's not really much difference, but nobody would mention them together. But M.R. James is doing something where he includes the anomalous in fundamental ways, but they are warnings to the curious. They include the anomalous, but in a way which is kind of, it's a very Christian tendency, I think, what's kind of in effect with him. So it's two ways in which modernism can be fettered. One of which is about a sort of experimentation which robs you of depth, no matter how sophisticated it is. And the other is about a inclusion of the so-called pulp anomalous, but in ways which keep it trapped within a sort of disguised kind of conventional metaphysical mode. And Picnic at Hanging Rock is sort of one example. The slight elusive quality of this sort of the world of the curses in the go-between just is enough to suggest something else. it's a bit tricky because it's a little bit too close to the curses of M.R. James, but it's this way in which you can have something which is deeply anomalous within a work, but in a way where there is a real freedom involved at the level of thought, a real freedom involved at the level of the terrains, the relationships of the work, so that you're not sort of trapped in a sort of ghetto of realism or in a ghetto of Gothic sensationalism or in a ghetto of extreme sophisticated experimentation. So it's pointing to something that is kind of the line of flight of modernism. It's the idea of unfettered modernism.
And I mean, you talked about this desire for a kind of an alterity, or reaching for an alterity, and I wondered if that has a relationship to your use of they, because there is a way in which it depersonalizes you both, and there's also this sort of sense in which perhaps you both disappear also in and become I don't know, slip away somehow in the piece.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Could you tell us a bit about that decision to use the they?
I mean, this was Mark, and when he suggested it, I instantly knew it was right. It is it's the impersonal, and it's a really good way of putting the impersonal into effect. It can kind of function in different ways. It can be both that it produces this effect of the two figures merging with the landscape, and it can also produce this sort of odd effect of the sort of the shot from outside, because obviously one of the eerie ways in which the eerie can sometimes be transmitted in film is by a tracking shot through undergrowth, for instance, through trees, giving the suggestion of somebody being watched. You know what I mean? It's a classic and probably cliche. But there's the fundamental thing about it is just that it is impersonal. It's really, really important that there are two figures there, but it's really not about. It's fundamentally not about them. The whole thing is an attempt to reach outsides about the nature of the world, and it completely underscores that, in the best possible way. I feel as a if you're going to set it in a key, that's definitely the key you set it in by using that third person plural. Yeah.
Well, I think it sidesteps neatly gender. But it also sidesteps a kind of, I mean, we talked about this previously, but like it sidesteps a kind of tradition of a romantic tradition of the I and the kind of centered subject, particularly within travel. Yeah, I don't know, the journey, if you like, or I was going to say travel writing. It's a very particular kind of travel writing, but the historically male subject free to roam. It also does that in a very neat way.
Yeah, it's very important. And I mean, although I wasn't thinking about it at the time, in writing the bit where the figure on the hill, it says a man, a woman. It's kind of it's the same move in a way. It's like obviously you're supposedly starting from Eno, but I'm really wanting that figure on a hill to not simply be a thought about Eno. So that the move there is just to see it as it could be a woman, it could be a man, and the fact it's an ungendered they is the same.
You wrote the text, and you're a prolific writer as well. What was it like writing for something to be listened to? And this also, this also, hopefully this can kind of open up onto the kind of discussion of some of the other collaborators, if you like, with
yes, indeed. Yes, yeah, exactly. I think as I was doing it, I often wasn't giving it too much thought. But overall, as you write, when you know you're going to be speaking it, you simply know you can't afford long paragraphs with heavy parentheses, which go on and on. You have to have something which will be easy to listen to. I didn't give much thought to it. I just knew that I was going to have to give it everything when we recorded it, and yeah, I made sure that it was something that didn't involve labyrinthine paragraphs. That was really the only thing that was involved in that. But I mean, I should say that, you know, it was just in terms of the writing of it. I did the writing, but with suggestions from Mark. Every now and again, we talk something through, and we get an idea about how something should be kind of presented, and then there would be certain ideas that I'd get from Mark, just in terms of sort of talking about how that will work. Yeah, and it was his initial idea to use the walk as the piece, to take the walk as the starting point. And yeah, and then yes, getting the they was really fundamental. So were you going to ask me anything in particular about the musicians?
Well, I mean, I was going to just kind of point, first of all, to sound design in general, and the sort of techniques that are used, because obviously the echo, you know, and the drone and the glitch are audio techniques that are you know, are fundamental to the piece.
Yeah.
But then there's also a range of musicians who soundtracked it, you know.
It was a real joy. It was a real joy bringing it together.
Yeah.
Mark did more of the crucial work with this than me. Mark was an unbelievable mixer, just phenomenally good at bringing tracks together and working out kind of good ways of using them in conjunction with each other. But the joy of it was that when we were making crucial decisions about what went with what, we'd be working together, and then we'd fine tune it. And then there's a lot of things which are kind of quite kind of complex things. There's one point where Mark has just included a lot of different elements. Some of the sound he got from the whistle sound comes from a whistle. There was which is obviously, it's been modified. Is it sampled from the original, from the BBC? No, production? It's an actual whistle. Yeah. I mean, I should say that in terms of people probably will know this, but yeah, in terms of the music, it was all commissioned. We got in touch with friends, and we got in touch with people who we knew, and we told them about the project. And Mark created a small website which they could use with a few pictures and a few quotes to get the atmosphere. And where I could, I spoke with my friends. I kind of spoke to them in detail about it, and talked about the kind of atmosphere that we were looking for. And getting the pieces was just, and working with them was a real joy. It's just amazing to have music which is very powerful and atmospheric like that. And sometimes you listen to moments, and I always love the point where you have a piece which just does not have concrete sound, but every now and again you get moments where there's this, you get a mention of the robin singing from a silver birch, and then you get this strange kind of blast of electronic sound, which seems as if it's some other way of hearing how a robin might sing. As if a robin could be heard as something far stranger than we normally imagine it. But this is the sonorous, the sonorous as a thread that leads out of the labyrinth of ordinary reality, perhaps. I think so, yes. I mean, it's interesting how it's sort of it's working in conjunction with obviously with writing, with text, with speech, fundamentally with speech. But I mean, I suppose put it this way, I think that the getting Elizabeth Walling's tracks was probably more fundamental than anything else. I can't think about the piece without her work, and we got that very close to the end within a few months of finishing, and it was just like this crucial final element. So yeah, I do think that there's this extraordinary power about sound, which it's both what we know, it's very beautiful, but it can have this both haptic and aniric power, where it sort of makes you dream and throws you into your kind of surambient sense field. If it's managing, if sound is kind of uneasy enough to do that, it's both exceptionally beautiful, but somehow there's something more about it. It's kind of helping to wake your senses and make you dream. So yeah, I mean, with Elizabeth Walling, it just felt very, very important somehow that we had her kind of voice there as sort of a eerie correlate floating across the top of capitalism. Something else, and outside.
Justin, we have a question. Well, we've got two questions actually in the chat, both from Mark Waller. Mark says, thanks, a wonderful listen. I'm interested in a post-COVID Fisher, a post-Floyd fall. It feels like the ghosts of M.R. James have fled psyches these days. Life is too interesting. Are they still there?
Thank you, Mark. A post-COVID Fisher. Sorry, what was the name of the person again? Is it
post-COVID? Oh, Mark Waller.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that something about COVID-19 is that it's created this sort of shocking situation where now we have an epidemic which is up on kind of, in a sense, on top of the general grind, the horror of ordinary reality. And it's quite hard in a way sometimes, I think, because of that, to get out of the empirical. And for good reasons, you know, if it's a life and death situation, you really do have to focus on, you know, all of the issues of those questions. But in the end, I think it's sort of quite important to see that there's certainly sort of subtle ways in which the production of viruses does seem to be deeply connected to bad practices with factory farming. And I think it's quite important to just see that what we have here is probably, even if only tangentially, connected to the depredations of capitalism, and probably also, yeah, I mean, it's kind of, yeah, connected to all of the kind of the horror of capitalism. And I think that probably it's really important to not get trapped staring in the direction of the Gothic. It's really, really crucial to maintain the mode of critique. But the danger is that you spend all of your time staring towards, you know, what could be called transcendental north, or what could be called the Gothic. And when things sort of double like this, so that you not only have the normal ordinary horror of existence, but you also have this additional thing with a tangential connection to it in the form of COVID-19, it can leave you with nothing but different kinds of empirical grimness and a certain kind of quality of not being able to sort of see beyond all of that. But I think the situation is always the same. It's always a question of waking your faculties. It's always a question of functioning as much as possible at the level of making micropolitical alliances. Basically, what the world needs is for people to form micropolitical escape groups. that's the way things are. It hasn't changed. You need that sort of group subject, alliances that can make things happen. So I don't think the sort of the Eerie has gone. It's a bit harder to be in contact with it.
Mark has also said perhaps it feels like the eroded site on Vanishing Land may have a starting point. That some eroded part of on Vanishing Land, wherever that might be, is the starting point for this post-COVID empiricism. Are there any other questions? Any viewers? Mark says thank you. Any other questions? There is a lag between me talking and the stream coming through onto the screen.
Yeah, I can't. The screen that I'm seeing, I'm not actually seeing. I'm not seeing the questions.
Yeah. Okay. There's nothing coming through at the moment. If anything does, you've mentioned. I mentioned the corridor in the introduction that I gave, and there are some references, of course, to it in pieces of text that you've written. Could you tell us something about the corridor and how it, whether it is a continuity or a project that's come out of On Vanishing Land, or how they relate to one another?
It's when Mark and I went to Felixstowe, we were working on an audio essay that we didn't make because it required actors, and we tried to make it, but we didn't have any money, and we weren't able to get the performances that we needed for it, and we worked with it for a while, but then we decided that we put the project on hold. We had like a 10 pages of writing, a sonic fiction. That project then became the novel The Corridor. And the basic idea of The Corridor is, I suppose I would say that it's an example of sending a few clicks into the unknown. In writing The Corridor, I was writing about a world in which there is an emergent parallel world, a parallel world which has just come into existence, which in some sense seems to have been dreamed up, generated by the planet itself, so that the planet loses its sort of pure material sort of aspect, although you don't ever find out anything about that. It's a parallel world, it's just emerged. It's apparently 500 years in the future, hundreds of years in the future. It's forested, it's derelict. There are a few people living there, a few human beings living there. There are ways of crossing over from this world into the corridor. The people who live in the corridor refer to this world as the disaster. And the corridor is no less dangerous than this world, but it's the world without the social forces that are oppressive within the ordinary reality. In the end, that's just the beginning. There's a whole. It's also an exploration of the Eerie. It's very fundamentally an exploration of the Eerie. There's a whole dimension reached from within the corridor, which is called the Deep Hotel, which is a world of very anomalous beings. So it's the Eerie in several different ways. And overall, it was an attempt to rethink the nature of the planet, the nature of capitalism, to rethink what could be going on in terms of anomalous forces. And it kind of takes elements from different places and added a tiny bit of things like sapphire and steel, just a fraction here and there.
It's the corridor. The corridor is sapphire and steel, right?
And I would say the corridor has 6 characters. They all write from their own point of view, and it alternates between them. And I would say that the corridor is perhaps, and I don't mean anything about the quality of the work, but it has, as it happens, 3 male, 3 female, 3 female, 3 male characters. I would say that the corridor is the waves crossed with picnic hanging rock a tiny bit of ballad, and with a little bit of sapphire and steel thrown in. The world probably doesn't want the waves crossed with sapphire and steel, but something happen. So, as far as I can talk about it, as I say, that means nothing about the quality of the work. I'm just talking about the inspirations. A little bit of sapphire and steel went into it, but it's one way of thinking about what it might mean to send a few clicks into the unknown, to really attempt to dream and live a world which is radically different, but which is an attempt to actually think what this world might be all along. If that's your starting point, you're doing something quite different from how fiction is normally conceived, because it's like taking a sort of planetary, finite, spinozistic immanence, a total other view of the planet, and working from that, and then adding other elements, sort of, to a certain extent, always as much as possible working from my own experience. I tried, if anything anomalous was involved, I tried to make sure that there were always correlates in my own experience, so that I knew at least one fundamental aspect of the anomalous elements was deeply connected to my experience. So it can be very striking. You know, I send a few clicks into the unknown, and yeah, maybe too much.
See what comes back. Okay, all right. Well, it's 9:10. So we'll unless I don't think there are any other questions, but we'll draw it to an end. All that remains for me to do is to thank you, Justin, for your time. Thank you for sharing this wonderful work. It's been an absolute pleasure to host you and to talk with you. And if you're listening at home, as I said in my introduction, On Vanishing Land is available to purchase from Bandcamp through Hyperdub. And I think it's important to support independent music and work such as this. So yeah, thank you very much, Justin. Thank you at home. Yeah. And yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you to the Assembly House, and thank you everyone, for listening. Brilliant. Thank you for the question. Thank you.
Hello. It should be back on now. I just posted the link to the Bandcamp in the YouTube chat if you're interested in that. I've also just adding to that the mailing list sign up if you're interested in hearing about future Assembly Online events. Thank you, Justin, for joining us tonight, and Jonathan for the offline event and organising it. And wonderful discussion to really open up that walk further. I look forward to walking on the Suffolk coast again sometime soon. Apologies for the slight feedback at the start. I'm working on a new setup tonight, but hopefully the rest worked well, and I think the audio was clear. Upcoming from Assembly Online, in 2 weeks, we should hopefully find out soon. We'll be able to announce soon what's called. I can just... Oh, sorry, I just need to... Johnny just came through on my computer. We'll be able to announce soon what's coming up in 2 weeks, but we'll announce the mailing list. On August the 6th is Sarah Lowndes is back to do a talk on Agnes Martin and the New Mexico desert. August the 20th is an international poetry reading hosted by Kai Draper, the third one. The 3rd of September, hopefully, will be another Oven By, yet to be confirmed. And then on September the 17th, we have Carl Foster, Kimberly Foster, and Victoria Mitchell coming for a group shared event. That's all from me. Thank you again for everyone who tuned in at home, and I hope you all stayed well and safe. Thanks again to Jonathan, Justin, and Mark for that event. Good night.